Republicans' plot to rig the Electoral College has failed in the state of Nebraska. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. National Republicans wanted Nebraska to change the way it allocates its Electoral College votes from splitting it by congressional district to a winner-takes-all system. Now let's start with the basics. 48 states plus Washington, D.C. award their Electoral College votes to the presidential candidate that wins the popular vote in their state. 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, split their Electoral College votes. Marc, why is that?
Yeah, so Paige, this is just something of a historical accident. I mean, the U.S. Constitution sets up the Electoral College. Every state gets a certain number, plus the District of Columbia, 538 in all, which means you need 270 Electoral College votes in order to become president of the United States. And as you point out, most of the states, 48 of them, passed laws that said they are going to allocate them on a winner-take-all basis. What does that mean? That means that whoever gets the most votes in that state gets all of the electors for that state. 2 states, Nebraska and Maine, made a different policy decision. They chose to allocate their electors essentially by congressional district. Maine has 4 electors because they have 2 congressional districts. Nebraska now has 5 electoral votes because they have 3 congressional seats, and one of those seats in Nebraska, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. This is centered around Omaha. It is a swing district. It has a Republican member of Congress right now in Don Bacon. That is a hotly contested congressional seat. And in 2016, Donald Trump won that congressional district, so he got that electoral vote. But Joe Biden won it in 2020, and so he got it. And this may not sound like a lot, but in some of the maps, some of the potential outcomes when you read online about what the path to 270 is, in some of those, this one congressional district is the difference between a Kamala Harris or a Joe Biden victory. So this seat, this one district, I should say, this one elector has been hotly contested. And you've seen advertising of the 2 presidential campaigns there, in addition to, like I mentioned, a congressional election there. But, Republicans wanted to try at the last minute to rig this. And Paige, they didn't succeed.
Now, Nebraska has had this split vote system since 1992. There have only been 2 presidential elections where the electoral vote has been split between 2 candidates, once in 2008, where the 2nd congressional district went for Obama, and then again in 2020, when it went for Joe Biden. Now, national Republicans were pushing Nebraska to change from the split electoral vote system to winner takes all. Now, like you said, it's a swing district, so there is a chance, I should say, that Donald Trump could win and take all 5 of Nebraska's electoral votes. But why the push to make the change now, a month before the election?
Because they're scared, because Donald Trump looks at the polling, Donald Trump looks at the campaign, Donald Trump looks at what an absolutely terrific candidate Kamala Harris has turned out to be, and he's scared, and his campaign is scared. And so, like so many other places where Republicans have tried to undermine the traditions of democracy, this is one of those places. It's a kind of a quirky thing that Maine and Nebraska have this system. And it usually, there is a district in Maine that is very competitive, and there's a district in Nebraska that's very competitive, and that's just sort of part of the process. But I think Donald Trump's folks woke up and realized that they are in real danger of losing this election, that Kamala Harris, has had a raft of positive polling results. Not that polling results are the be all end all. And they are looking for every last minute advantage they can have, even if it means, kind of disadvantaging the voters of Nebraska, which this change would have done, and upsetting, the traditional balance that takes place nationally. Donald Trump doesn't care about any of that. He only cares about himself.
Nebraska is special because it has a unicameral legislature. There's only one chamber. It is made up of 39 senators. Now, right now, 2/3 of the chamber are Republican. That is 33 senators. That is also the exact number of senators it would take to pass this legislation, to have it go into effect immediately in time for this election. The Republican governor of Nebraska said he would not call a special session to consider this change unless all 33 Republican senators were on board. Now, this really would change how the presidential election could play out this fall. Maine Democrats, in response, threatened to change their own Electoral College vote system if Nebraska Republicans had gone through. Now, it was unlikely that Maine Democrats would succeed in making that change. Maine has different legislative rules than Nebraska. It's likely that the law just wouldn't have gone into effect in time to affect the elections this year. But it came really close. It came down to one Republican senator in Nebraska who said no. State Senator Mike McDonnell, a former Democrat who switched parties to the GOP earlier this year over his stances on abortion. And on Tuesday, the Nebraska governor said he would not call a special session to consider this Electoral College vote change, all because this one Republican senator said no and refused to give Republicans the 33 votes they needed to make the change.
Paige, and you make an important point. Nebraska has a unicameral system, which means that rather than like a state house and a state senate, they just have one legislative chamber. And it has historically been marked by, pretty good efforts at bipartisanship as a result. It's definitely Republican controlled, but over time that bipartisanship has waned some. But there is still a sense in Nebraska of getting things done within this one chamber with some semblance of bipartisanship. So this was a bit of a culture shock, I think, to see this strong partisan effort to, at the very last minute, make these kinds of changes. And you point out that it was one Republican senator from the Omaha area, from the area that would be most impacted by this, who basically stood up and said no. Now, he is a former Democrat who is now a Republican. And so his own seat is, a close election. So I think that probably played something into this. His constituents, I think, would not have appreciated this last minute change. So some of this may have been self-interest, but it may have also been the fact that this honestly would not be good for the state of Nebraska. Right now, Nebraska and the Omaha area in particular benefits economically and politically from being at the center, right? I mean, the fact is, if you live in one of the swing states, you may not like how much television commercials you see around politics, but there's lots of money being spent in your local television stations by out-of-state campaigns. You may not like all the traffic jams and the like by people holding campaign events in your state, but local businesses are engaged in commerce with those campaigns around those events. And so, Nebraska, the Omaha area right now is benefiting from the attention it gets from the national campaigns around this. And I think this local politician understood that above partisanship, that this was in the best interest of his constituents and the people who live in and the businesses in and around the 2nd Congressional District. But Paige, I think there's a larger message here that we shouldn't, leave out by just focusing on this one state. The Republican Party today is a shaken party. It is a party that is not confident in its electoral prospects. They no longer achieve majority results in national elections. When the one thing we know is that when we wake up in November after the elections, when all the votes are totaled, we know this. We know that more Americans will have voted for Kamala Harris than Donald Trump. We know that more Americans will have voted for a Democratic House of Representatives and a Democratic Senate than for Republicans. And that is just sort of at this point baked in the cake, right? So what Republicans are trying to do is they're trying to work within a system in which they do not enjoy majority support of the electorate. They therefore lack the self-confidence that parties that are majoritarian oftentimes have. And where that has led them is to try to figure out every way they can change a rule. Whether that is a rule like this, whether it's a rule of who gets to vote, whether it's a rule of how you register, whether it's a rule about how elections are certified, they are angling at every possible rule because they are a minority party, because they are lacking the confidence that a majoritarian party would have. And that makes them very dangerous. It makes them dangerous to democracy, because if your sole goal of governing is to find ways around majoritarianism, then eventually that comes to define you as a party. Donald Trump is an authoritarian and does not respect democracy because he cannot command majorities. And unfortunately, that is permeating every pore and crevice of the modern Republican Party. And that is why we saw this in Nebraska, and it is why we are seeing so many other tactics around this country. Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode of Democracy Docket. Make sure you are subscribed to our free daily and weekly newsletters, and we'll see you next time.